Auckland is going to be well served by this legislation. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Chair.
I call Ian McKelvie.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to take a brief call. It probably will be brief on Part 1, Clause 7, Section 2A, or Part 2A, or Section 2A. And it points to the fraught difficulty of this type of legislation and the challenges that the Commission will inevitably face, despite the cleverness of our legislative ability in this House. So if you looked at clause at 2A, it talks about time limits and things like that on claims, and I can point to evidence, even in the Manawatu, of a building that was damaged in the 1931 Napier earthquake, patched up, re-damaged again in recent earthquakes, and the issue that this part of the legislation brings out is the extreme difficulty that will occur in places where we've had major earthquakes, such as Christchurch. The extreme difficulty that will occur in the event of another event, and then the dissemination of the information that's required to point to whether that damage was created earlier or later and which event it was part of. And I think, whilst I think that this is as good as you could do with the legislation, it nonetheless will inevitably lead to significant arguments. And so 2A-B, for example, points to the time that notice is given, and it gives the Commission, I think, something like 3 months, I think, to accept or decline that information, and that will be very difficult, because it will take some understanding the time or the time that the damage occurred, and there's inevitable that there will be significant amounts of damage. They might not be significant damage, but significant amounts of damage that have never been detected as a result of either Kaikoura or earthquakes of the magnitude of either Kaikoura or Christchurch. And of course, the methods by which we build now are so different than they used to be. And if you looked at Napier in 1931, the wooden buildings in Napier survived very well. Probably in Christchurch they did as well. But there's nonetheless some significant structural changes to those buildings, but not obvious damage. Whereas with our modern buildings standards and using brick and concrete and all that sort of stuff as we do, the opportunity for damage to have occurred and be obvious it's relatively simple, because they crack. Whereas old wooden buildings don't crack, but the foundations move, and so you can have all sorts of different damage occurring in these events. So I think that whilst the regulations, I think that the Select Committee's done a good job of the regulations, I think it's very difficult to see how you could ever restrict the potential for contesting of these types of regulations. So that was the point I wanted to make, Madam Chair, and I don't think it's a serious one, and I don't think it's a big issue, but nonetheless it will come to it will come or rear its head again in the future. So thank you, Madam Chair. That's my contribution.
I call Dr. Duncan Webb.
Thank you for this call. Just wanted